Today's episode of Dungeon Crawlers Radio is brought to you by Gamers Inn, your one-stop location for all your gaming needs. Located in Lehigh City, Utah, their fun and friendly staff will be more than happy to answer any of your gaming needs. Just remember, Gamers Inn, it's where adventures begin.
It's time to power up.
Autobots, roll out! Broadcasting live from the DCR studio.
Oh yeah!
The Geek Revolution starts here.
Excellent!
Get ready for the #1 hit geek radio show out there.
Well, it is impressive, isn't it?
Because it's time for Dungeon Crawlers Radio.
Let's get ready to rumble! And now, the moment you've all been waiting for.
All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of Dungeon Crawlers, where we're here with author Richard Baker to talk about his new novel, Valiant Dust, which is kind of a new military science fiction series that he's started. But without really going into detail, because it is out now, I'm going to let Richard explain a little bit more about the book, because it came from him, and he knows more about it than I do.
Well, Valiant Dust is basically it's in a lot of ways it's the basic setup of the universe is it's the age of colonialism, the scramble for Africa, the great power rivalries that kind of led up to World War I, played out in space, in the 31st century with planets and star nations kind of playing the role of colonies that different great powers are fighting over. And the protagonist, Sikandar North, is the gunnery officer on a cruiser of the Aquilian Commonwealth. And he and his shipmates are called to the planet of Gadira, where there is a difficult local uprising in process that threatens to overthrow the government of Gadira. And the great powers are kind of gathering around, trying to figure out into whose lap Gadira is about to fall. It's kind of very loosely based on of all things, the second Moroccan crisis of 1909. But I'm trying to obviously, bring a new military sci-fi spin to that, and use it as a background for telling a good story about what it's like to be a naval officer serving in a tense and confusing time.
Nice. No, that's really cool. And I like how you've taken kind of a modern, well, I wouldn't say modern, a historical event, that's better, that has happened in our world, and then kind of twisted it and changed it into this science fiction story up in space. I mean, that's just fantastic. And it's really fun when you can take an idea like that, something that we can read in history or we've experienced ourselves, and then make a story of it that we can connect to, because we can it makes it easier, at least in my mind, as a reader, that we can connect with that.
Yeah, I think it lends a certain air of plausibility to it also, because if it happened in the past, it's not impossible that something like that could happen again in the future.
Yeah.
They say you should write what you know. I've always been a big history buff. Obviously, I'm crazy for naval history in particular. So this is a way that I can kind of draw on my strengths and interests as I'm working on developing a new universe and creating just the beginning of what hopefully is going to be a kind of grand epic sweeping storyline. Following a once again, hopefully interesting character, through many years in his career.
Now, because you mentioned that you like naval warfare and stuff like that, how has that come into play here? Because now we're not really in the oceans, but we're using, star cruisers or vessels out in space. Did that come into play, how they maneuver and kind of fly through space?
Yeah, they it really does. A couple of the guys who are running a great military sci-fi series right now actually have done a pretty good job of capturing sort of like the feel of like the modern missile age of naval combat. So I wanted to kind of think about a set of logical assumptions that would kind of change the tenor of how combat and conflict would work in my universe. And so in Sikandar's universe, battleships and cruisers and things like that are heavily armored. They carry essentially great big rail guns that they call kinetic cannons. They're armed with torpedoes that use warp fields to kind of disappear from normal space so that they can actually survive to get to the target before they reappear again. And the general feel is the battles in my universe tend to feel a little bit more like the big gun encounters like Jutland or Tsushima or Manila Bay, in that sort of age of steam and iron.
Okay.
And some of the tactics that would work in that, like things like crossing the T or finding the right range to engage the enemy, are tactics that would also work in Sikandar North's universe. So yeah, I was definitely looking for a place where I could draw some inspiration from a sort of real time and era in naval combat, and see if I could create a setting where some of that stuff would kind of still stay true.
Nice. Now, with kind of the futuristic technology, did you find it was a little bit more? Let me step back. Did you find that you needed to explain more on how like the rail guns and this futuristic technology worked, or did you just go with the assumption that the reader would just, hey, I've seen stuff like this on Star Wars or other sci-fi books, and just go with it?
No, I definitely take a few spots to hopefully provide at least a basic explanation for what's going on. It's it's what we writers sometimes refer to as a expository lump, meaning it's a hunk of exposition, or basically dropping out of the narrative to explain something that's going on.
Yeah.
And so you have to be careful about how you do that, because obviously a ton of that is a wall of text for the reader to get through. But there are occasions where I feel as a writer it's a little bit justified to step back and say, okay, here's what you really need to know about how this stuff works, because you'll understand now the ramifications of how this is going to influence the story and the characters and their decisions.
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously, I try not to beat you, the reader, over the head with it, and but it's one of those your mileage may vary things, right? Some people hit that stuff and they love getting that information. Some people hit that stuff and they I gotta chug through a paragraph of this, and they don't like it. So it can, I err on the side of trying to pick a couple of spots and say, all right, here I'm just going to explain a little bit about what's going on, and as long as I don't do it too much, or I don't bury it all in the same chapter or make a great big wall out of it, then I think my reader will forgive me the occasional paragraph that goes into some explanation and carry on with me as I kind of pick things up again.
Yeah. No, I mean I agree with you. It's kind of that that balance that you have to ride, where it's like, okay, I need to give them this information so they can kind of understand how things are happening. But at the same time, if I give too much, then their eyes kind of gloss over, and I may lose them. So
exactly.
Yeah. So with the events happening in this book, and we already know it's a series. How many books are we looking at? Is it 3, 5? I mean, what?
Well, right now I'm currently contracted for 3 books with Tor. I've obviously Valiant Dust is out. I've finished the second book already. That's in the process of editing. That book's called Restless Lightnings, and that'll be out in the fall. And the third book I'm kind of just starting to work on now. But realistically, with this character in this universe, I think there's a whole bunch more stories to tell. So
Yeah.
I'm hopeful that Tor and I will get together and talk sometime in the not too distant future, and we'll figure out a way to bring a few more Sikandar North stories out.
Nice. Well, trilogies are always fun. At least in my mind, it's easy. It's easy to jump into. There's 3 books that you have a good story to jump on. But with this type of universe, like you said, you could have another trilogy set or another one. Kind of like what Bob Salvatore has done with his Dark Elf books, where he kicks out 3 and those do really well. It kicks out another trilogy, but it's a huge, still overall story arc within that same universe. And I mean, that would be fantastic if this could work out that way as well.
Yeah, I would love to be as successful as Bob is too. That's that's there's definitely some truth there. But I know the other thing is by nature of the of the era that I'm trying to sort of capture the mood and feel of in this book. The stories are also fairly episodic too, right? I mean, there's I hate to call it like the crisis of the week, but I mean that's kind of the way that things are developing. That book 2, I know is going to put Sikandar in a totally different corner of the galaxy, dealing with a totally different situation. Some characters carry forth from book to book. Other characters will disappear from the story for a bit and then might come back in a book or 2 later. As you get like naval assignments, like in the military, right? Sometimes you are with people that you've served with before. It's like, oh, hey, 6 years ago, you and I were back on, this post here or that post there. We served together on this ship. And then, I was assigned over here, you were assigned over there. We didn't see each other for a while. And then we find ourselves back in the same spot again a few years later. That's sort of the way some of the secondary or supporting characters are going to be kind of brought in and rotate out as I'm moving forward.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's really, really fantastic. And I like the idea of kind of the episodic issue of the week type thing, because 24 was really popular with viewers because of that dynamic. I mean, yes, it was still within a 24-hour period, but every week it was a new issue or something came up that Jack Bauer had to overcome. And and a lot of our TV series are built up that same way. Whether it's The Flash or CSI or whatever, it's kind of that, what's the new thing this week that we have to go through with that overarching storyline that's still going on. So I think people will jump in on this and just love it. And I'm a huge sci-fi fan. I love that era, that feel, the ships, future technology and that, but you get a good story in there and it's just fantastic.
Well, thanks. Obviously, I like that stuff too. I wouldn't have written this book, right? I mean, this book is kind of the book that came about when I was with obviously TSR and Wizards of the Coast, working as a game designer for many, many years. And while working at Wizards, I was under a fairly strict non-compete agreement, right? Meaning that I was limited in what I was allowed to write, on my off time. And so, that worked out okay for me.
All right, everyone, we just wanted to take a moment to talk about Paragon City Games and their awesome Black Friday deals. They have everything you can imagine. They've got great sales on board games, card games, miniature reductions.
Miniature. They're not very miniature in their reductions.
Yeah. And, of course, they've got so many really good deals going on.
Card sleeves.
Card sleeves. I mean, you name it, they've got it.
I don't know what that means.
Card protectors.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that people don't get their greasy fingers all over your precious cards, especially that one that's worth $15, and you're like, this one card's worth $15. I don't want you touching it. You put it in the card sleeve, suddenly you feel fine with them playing with it. I'm looking at you, Wes.
It's
Ooh, I want to glare at Wes.
it's like a bulletproof vest for your cards. Yeah. But anyways, they got a new website coming up online. You'll be able to shop on their website for any of these amazing products. And not only that, they're going to have more amazing deals coming to you even after Black Friday for Christmas. So come into Paragon City Games, give them a call, check them out online any way you can to find out these deals, because As they say, this is where heroes come to play.
Okay, so my question is, with you working with TSR and Wizards of the Coast, and working with Dungeons and Dragons and Forgotten Realms, that's kind of a fantasy-based setting with working with elves and drow and dragons and stuff like that, and magic. Was it a far leap to go from that to the science fiction setting? Because they exist in the same realm, but they're almost polar opposites in a way, I would think.
It actually wasn't that hard for me, simply because I've been a lifelong fan of sci-fi.
Okay.
I've read, I cut my teeth as a reader back, when gosh, I was 10, 11, 12 years old. Is kind of when I really discovered fantasy and sci-fi. And the funny story about that is, the library in my hometown, had this awesomely antiquated sci-fi spinner rack of these little paperbacks. So the stuff that I kind of first started reading when I really got into sci-fi to begin with was a lot of golden age sci-fi, from stuff from the 40s, things like Robert Heinlein's Juvenile SF and Doc Smith's Lensman stories, right? And old Ray Bradbury and Asimov stuff. So I really kind of came in, even though I was doing this reading, like 1980 or so.
Yeah.
I kind of started off on the stories of the 40s and the 50s, and because that's what they had in the library. And then obviously, even like all the years I was working on D&D and Forgotten Realms, the thing I kind of used as my sort of for fun reading in the evening, the thing that was always sitting on my bedstand at night, the nightstand by my bed, was usually sci-fi of some sort.
Yeah.
The trickier part, I think, is if you're trying to maintain anything like a nod towards hard science fiction, as opposed to, just kind of more lighthearted, less serious space opera, and that's a little bit tougher to really wrap your head around, because if you really want to pay attention to hard sci-fi, you're going to be making decisions like, well, nobody can travel faster than light, because as far as we know, you really can't do that.
Yeah.
And here's all these considerations about, if you were to actually point a particle beam in someone's direction and fire it at them, you'd probably just kill everybody around you with radiation, right? That's not real fun, right? It's kind of not what we're in for. So there's definitely some places where, I try to observe, the real world implications of the technology, and there's other places where I allow myself to have faster than light travel, because it's it's kind of fun, and it helps portray the universe that I want to portray.
Yeah. Well, we also have to contend with how in our brain the only way to have artificial gravity is to have a ship that rotates the whole time, and what kind of complications does that bring into play and stuff like that. So I think the softer science fiction is always easier, at least for a writer and for a reader, because then you don't have to kind of get everything wrapped up in your head on how things work and how things should work or how shouldn't work. And we should just be having fun, enjoying the ride and the story that's unfolding before us.
I think it's possible to tell great stories both ways. So I'm happy to lean one way in some aspects and lean a different way in the others.
Okay. So what is different about the hero of your story? What is unique about him that maybe we haven't seen before?
Well, the interesting thing about Sikandar is that he is from a world that is essentially a colonial possession belonging to a great power. He serves. He is a Kashmiri, meaning he's from the system of Kashmir, and he is serving in the Star Navy of the Commonwealth of Aquila, which is the great power that essentially conquered Kashmir 100 years ago and added it to its colonial empire. So Sikandar's in the interesting position of kind of serving in the Navy of the country that conquered his country, if you want to think about it that way.
Okay.
And that means that, first of all, he is faces a fair amount of kind of institutional distrust and cultural misgivings, if you will, on the part of the Aquilian shipmates that he has. Most of them are fine, are not particularly elitist or racist in any way, and are happy to judge a person by how well he does his job. Others do carry some real baggage about the idea that they just can't believe that somebody from Kashmir would have the technical proficiency to actually carry a commission in Aquila's Navy. Or others think that a person from Kashmir, Kashmir is a kind of backwards and superstitious planet, right? Because gosh, they actually still have religions there. And naturally, doesn't think that kind of speaks well of somebody's suitability for service. Sikandar is, and when I realized that Sikandar was dealing with this, the really kind of interesting question to me became, okay, so why would you serve in the armed forces of the country that was kind of Aquila is a reasonably benevolent colonial empire, but even so, that colonial empires, even the good ones, aren't that great. And Sikandar is making a hard choice about serving in this navy, and the answer is because as it turns out, he's the fourth son in a large family of aristocrats, and they Kashmiri aristocrats. They have the means to send him off world. And when you think about it, what Kashmir is desperately trying to do is they're trying to catch up, right? They need to learn everything they can about the technology and the cultural outlook and the attitudes and the direction that Aquila is going. So Sikandar, in a lot of ways, is he's off-world because it suits his family's purposes to have somebody from the family be off-world.
Yeah.
But he's also there because in the long run, Kashmir knows it's not going to be under Aquila's thumb, forever, and it's going to be people like Sikandar who actually go out there and accept and endure a little bit of ostracism in some ways, in order to learn from a country that has a nation that's got something to teach their world, even if it's not necessarily going to be a pleasant or easy lesson to learn.
Nice. I like that.
It's actually a really difficult line to walk because obviously our own real world there's lots of legacy of colonialism that's very negative, and there's lots of reasons to look at this and say, okay, is this in bounds to write about this stuff? And so I really had to take a step back and approach this with care. My initial take on the character was I was like, okay, hey, I'm a Caucasian, I'm an American, I go to church at the Methodist Church. If I tried to write my character as the one who was in the world, my own viewpoint as the one who was in that world being kind of under the dominion of somebody else, all of a sudden we'd be looking at, okay, here's the white male Christian, up against the, the atheists and that would not work, right? I could not tell that story, and it would be a very different and ugly story if I tried to set it up that way.
Yeah.
So I tried to,
Well, I like the fact that there's conflict. I mean, you've already set up conflict, not only emotionally, but physical, and social challenges that are all built in because of this, and that makes for not only a believable character, but a really fun experience because he's going about doing the daily things, and he's filming this. I mean, we all do. I mean, there's some point in our lives where we felt external pressures pushing us, or pressuring us to do things or not to do things, and it just adds more realism to a character as well as to a story. So I love that type of stuff when it's in my stories.
Yeah, there's ultimately what it boils down to is that Sikandar lives in a pretty complicated universe.
Yeah.
And it's a universe where not everything is painted in right and wrong and black and white. A lot of times there's a fair bit of gray and a fair bit of kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't in the setting. And I'm hoping I can kind of keep that theme going through the course of these stories that wow, it's sometimes the figuring out what the right decisions are or figuring out which side is the good side is not always going to be so easy.
Yeah. Now, what was the catalyst that made you become a writer? I mean, because there's always some point where a writer just decides, I'm going for it. But what was that catalyst? Because it's not something that's really easy or rewarding very quickly. I mean, sometimes you spend months to years working on that first book or two or three or four until you finally get one out. And then it takes a while before you actually start getting people acknowledging that and so forth. So what was the catalyst that made you decide to do that?
I think I kind of always had the ambition to write. I mentioned earlier about the idea of being a 10, 11-year-old kid and really discovering sci-fi and reading The Hobbit for the first time and discovering old first edition D&D kind of almost around the same time. And so, I mean, I think had an aspiration from falling in love with the Lord of the Rings to say, man, I want to build worlds, right? I want to tell stories. I want to imagine, really, great places with and terrible enemies and bold heroes and do something with that. So through through high school and college, I wouldn't say that I wrote a lot. I mean, as every now and then I fiddle around with an attempt to write a short story or build an interesting D&D adventure. After I graduated from college and I was serving in the Navy, I made the process of writing a sort of my hobby. I had when I was off the ship, when I was off duty, I kind of made it. It's like, okay, I said I want to do this. I want to try and do this. And over the course of about a year and a half, I banged out a 200,000 word monster of a manuscript, a great big fantasy epic, which, as it turns out, I never managed to sell. It probably, wasn't all that great. I mean, I think there's parts of it that were pretty good, but still, by and large, it probably didn't sell, and it probably shouldn't have sold. But what it did do is it taught me that I can do it.
Yeah.
There's a real power in starting something and getting, after months and months, getting to type the end, at the end of the process and say, hey, I finished the first draft. I wrote something from start to finish, and now I know I can do it. And I think that with that experience and understanding that, okay, maybe that first attempt's not perfect, but now you know something about what it takes to do this, and now you know something about how it's done. I was able to parlay that. I think it helped me get that first job at TSR after I finished up with my active duty. I think at TSR it helped me go to the book department at TSR and say, hey, obviously I love writing the D&D stuff. That's fine, but I'd also like to write novels. What's it take to what do I have to do to get signed up to take a whack at a Forgotten Realms novel? And from there, it's kind of that's where, that's how I wound up. I wouldn't say backing into it, but it was, certainly not the usual route, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit of luck, a little bit of work, and a lot of imagination, I guess, when it comes to writing, because I know there are a lot of people out there that have written for years and they still have yet to have something published, but it's kind of the beauty of the publishing industry now. It's kind of changed where you can get your book out there now without having to worry about going through a publisher or anything like that. But
yeah, it is tough. I mean, obviously, there's a really rough signal to noise ratio in that world. But every now and then, people pop out of that and wind up doing quite well. I want to believe that the guy who wrote The Martian, for example, originally self-published. I think that's correct. There's the guy who wrote the book Wool, I think, is another one.
Yeah.
I mean, so some of these guys are out there kind of getting themselves discovered through that medium. But
I mean, even Larry Correia, his first book, Monster Hunter International, it was self-published at first, and then Bain came back and picked it up, and now the entire series is out there, and he's very well known for that series. And or vice versa, you have people like Brandon Sanderson who struggled with their first couple books came out, lightning struck, and then now look at him.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's a fun process. I just think it's fantastic when anyone can say, I have a book, it's done, it's out there for readers to read, whether millions are flocking to it to read, or even one or two. It's still a huge accomplishment to have finished a book, like you said, and it's even better that someone else is reading it.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of people out there who sort of tell themselves, yeah, I'd like to be a writer, and there's some people who kind of fiddle with it off and on, and ultimately what it comes down to is the guy who's a writer is the guy who actually finishes it.
Yeah.
That's it's kind of a harsh truth about the business, I think.
Yeah. Well, and that's one thing that I think a lot of people overlook, and why a lot of people don't do it is there's all this upfront work. You get a job, you go, you work for a week or two, you get a paycheck. If you're a writer, you work for quite some time, turn in your manuscript, hope someone takes it, they decide they want it, they publish it, you go through all the editing process, and then the book comes out, and then you hope it sells, and then maybe you get a paycheck. It's this weird dynamic. And it's a lot of work. Even after the book comes out, you still got to promote it. You still got to find your audience and so on and so forth. So it's not just, hey, my book's out, I'm going to now make a bucket full of money. It trickles in.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's in a lot of ways, right? I mean, Valiant Dust exists because I spent, 5-6 months in 2015. Writing it. I didn't see any money in 2015 for that, right? That was right. That was something I was doing instead of making money in 2015 was working on this thing that, hey, if all goes well, I get to see a royalty check for, and end of January, 30 days after the quarter in which it goes on sale. That's pretty typical. Yeah. I mean, I did get a modest advance on it, but. But by and large, right? I mean, this is a business where you have to kind of work on faith a little bit and say, if I write well, if I'm telling the best stories I can, and I'm working with, and I'm lucky enough to kind of fall in with a good agent and a good publisher, I just have to kind of trust that, I'm going to make out all right in the end.
Yeah. Well, and plus you have a following from the years of being at TSR and Wizards, so that always helps. But it is. I mean, you put in all this work years ago, hoping to get something next year. 2018, almost 3 years later.
Yep.
Which again, you're doing it because you love doing it. You love being a storyteller. It's definitely a work of love, but I don't think a lot of people realize how much of unpaid time goes into it before that book is in their hands. Yeah,
I mean, you do need to have a fair bit of luck, and also some real talent to be someone who gets to do this kind of full time and exclusively, right? Most the vast majority of folks out there writing are folks who have a day job of some sort or another.
Yes.
It's.
So, what would be something, just because we're almost out of time, what would
Sure.
be something that you would suggest or would cheer on an individual that is thinking about writing? What would be like the top thing that you would tell them to do?
It's kind of funny. I answered a question like this once at a panel, and I got some dirty looks from the other panelists. My answer would be, if you can, cheat.
Okay.
Right. If you know somebody, if somebody's cousin's roommate is, works somewhere, right? If you have any kind of in, gosh, make use of it. Because ultimately, right, I mean, obviously publishers buy manuscripts, but they also buy authors.
Yeah.
When you think about it, right? They have to have a sense that they know what somebody's about, and they know what they're likely to turn out, right? So I mean, you kind of need to to rise above the slush pile. Yeah, it's there's probably some pretty good stories that are sitting in slush piles right now that aren't going to get published because the amount of the amount of manuscripts that come into this business is pretty high, and the amount that actually get picked out and published is really not that high.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think things like conventions, writer workshops, getting a chance to meet folks and make a personal connection if you can. I think that's probably about the best way you can really kind of put your thumb on the scale and cheat it a little bit. I mean, but obviously, write a great story. Write the best story you can. That's first and foremost. But then after that, I think it's a little bit of trying to knock on doors and get people to know who you are.
No, I like that, and I do have to agree with the statement that publishers are buying authors in a way, because even though the book is done, it's still up to the author to go out there and talk about it, help promote it, because it's not all on the publisher's end. And if you can't connect with your audience as an author, it just seems like the book kind of doesn't go anywhere. Because I can't count the number of times I have wanted to go meet the authors of my favorite books. Growing up in that was such an exciting thrill to be able to meet these story makers that had woven this story that I loved so much, and the authors that were personable and would connect with me and speak with me. Man, I own every one of their books. The authors that didn't really do that just kind of hi and signed the book and then shipped it and then I was off. It just wasn't the same, and the desire to read the next book just wasn't as strong as, oh man, I burned through that book in 2 days, he signed it, it was awesome, and now I got to wait a whole year for another one. Yeah. So
yeah, I certainly try to approach where I'm at with a little bit of humility. I mean, I've had the good fortune to be able to enjoy, in a lot of ways, two different careers that many people have aspirations to be part of.
Yeah.
Between my history as my career as a game designer and my career as a writer of fantasy stories and sci-fi stories, and many people look at that and say that's got to be the coolest job ever. So, I'm usually pretty aware of that when I'm meeting folks and saying, hey, awesome, you like what I do? That's amazing. I'm glad you're here, right?
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't have a chance to do it if it wasn't for folks who liked what I did.
Yeah. Well, since we're out of time, we need to wrap up. Where can our listeners find this book? Is it available on ebook and audiobook as well? And where can they find you to, whether it's conventions or online, so they can follow and get more information?
Awesome. Valiant Dust is available in bookstores kind of all over. It's definitely in Barnes & Noble. Many of the kind of bigger, local or regional bookstores. places like a Powell's book or books or like the good local bookstores that have a decent sci-fi fantasy collection should be carrying it. And I always encourage people, hey, support your local bookstore if you can, right? I mean, that's a tough business to be in, and if you can go down to the corner and pick it up, I think it's fantastic. If those venues aren't close by you, you can find it on Amazon. You can find it. It is available right now in both Nook and Kindle ebook formats. There is an audiobook version that's available right now, which, by the way, is read by just an amazing voice actor. A fellow by the name of Steve West did the narration, and he's fantastic.
Nice.
I love the way the audiobook sounds. It's great. And as far as a little more information on me and what I'm doing, I have a website which is richardbakerauthor.com, and that's basically a little summary of. I do post routine. I'm trying to be good about posting regular updates there as far as what I'm working on and cool things about my stories. I am going to be appearing at Liberty Bay Books in Bremerton. Speak of the devil.
Nice.
Actually, on November 25th, and I think I'm going to be a panelist at Emerald City Comic Con.
Next
Tor is Tor is arranging setting up some panels for writers in the Seattle area for Emerald City, and they've asked me to be there. And turns out that's kind of in my backyard, and gosh, my kids are super enthused to go.
Nice.
So
I know I'll be there at Emerald City Comic Con, and I think the rest of us will probably be up there as well. It's just a really fun con to go to. I was there last year and really enjoyed it, and they do a great job. So maybe we'll bump into you and see you and say hi.
Please do. I'd love to actually shake your hand and meet folks face to face.
Yeah. Well, everyone, go out, grab your copy of Valiant Dust. It's a fantastic sci-fi adventure that you will love. Definitely has our approval on it. And whether you pick up the ebook, the physical book, or the audio book, it's going to be great. And I just want to say thank you for coming on the show.
Hey, it's been my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Everyone, with that said, we're out of here, and we'll catch you next time.
You're listening to Dungeon Crawlers Radio. Please subscribe and follow them on Facebook or Twitter, precious. No, we're even promoting these filthy idiots. Who doesn't like them? Who doesn't like anyone? No, they're our friends, precious, our friends. No, shut up. Please subscribe.